Right, with Hashem's help, we will learn today Yevamos Daf Mem Aleph. We left off Yevamos Daf Mem Aleph by the Mishnah on top of the page. Says the Mishnah, HaChoylitz liyevimtoi. Let's give us our example of there being three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven passed away. Reuven is married to Rachel. He passed away childless. And Shimon does chalitza with Rachel. We learned in the previous sugya that midrabanan, a person is not allowed to marry the relatives of his chalutza, which means that if Rachel has a sister called Levi, now that Shimon did chalitza to Rachel, Shimon is no longer allowed to marry Leah. Rachel has a sister called Leah, Shimon cannot marry Leah. Says the Mishnah, after Shimon does chalitza with Rachel, the Nasa Achiv, Shimon's brother Levi, married Esachaisa, Rachel's sister Leah, Umeis, and Levi passes away without children. Midoiraisa, Shimon has the mitzvah of doing Yibum or chalitza with Leah. Midrabanan, Shimon is not allowed to do chalitza, Yibum with Leah, because she is a relative of his chalutza, chayis chalutzasai. So therefore, says the Mishnah, chayletzes v'loy misyabem, as chalitza he has to do, but Yibum he doesn't do. V'chein, and likewise, and the Gemara is going to immediately point out that the v'chein, the likewise, is not the exact wording needed here, because actually we're going to contrast the Reisha of the Mishnah with this following case. That Hamegadash Ishtay, Shimon marries Rachel and Shimon divorces Rachel. A man midoiraisa cannot marry Achois Ishtay, even if he's not married anymore to Rachel. And then V'nasa Achiv Esachaisa, and then Levi marries Leah, Umeis, and Levi dies without children. So who is falling to Yibum? Leah is falling to Yibum into Shimon, but Leah is Achois Ishtay, which she is a erva midoiraisa. So as we learned in the first Mishnah Daf Beis, that an erva automatically is no longer connected to Shimon, and therefore harezu patura, no yibum nor chalitza is permitted nor needed. Case number 2, Shemeres Yavam. Let's give us the same case. You have three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven married Rachel. Reuven dies. So Rachel is falling to Yibum to Shimon and Levi. So Shemeres Yavam, while Rachel is waiting for Yibum, goes along Levi, Shekidish Achev Esachaisa. Levi is Mekadesh Leah. This is the sugya that we mentioned before when we were learning about the Yesh Zika or Ein Zika. And our Mishnah, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, is the one that holds Yesh Zika, which means that really none of them, nor Shimon, nor Levi, should have an act of intimacy with Leah because she's called Achois Ziku Kasei, Yesh Zika. And he went ahead, Levi went ahead, and he did Kedushin. Now the act of Kedushin in itself was not prohibited, because the Isur Midrabanan of having a relation with Achois Ziku Kasei is having a relation, having a physical relation. However, for him to consummate his Kedushin, for him to do Nesuyin, then he would be violating a Isur Midrabanan. So Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Amru, so it was said in the name of Yehuda ben Beseira that Oimrim Loi, Bezdin tells Levi, you did Kedushin with Leah, Hamting, wait, don't do Nesuyin, don't finalize your marriage with Leah, Ad Sheyasochicha Maisa, until your brother Shimon does something, resolves the Zika with Rachel, either by doing chalitza or by doing yibum. And as we learned before, that when Shimon will do either yibum or chalitza with Rachel, it's going to retroactively take away the zika that Levi had with Rachel. And now that there will not be a zika between Levi and Rachel, Levi can consummate his marriage with Leah, with the sister of Rachel. Sefer says the Mishnah, Chalatz la'achiv v'kansa, then Yichnos es ishtay, Levi can finalize his marriage with Leah. However, continues the Mishnah, if Rachel passes away, Shimon did not do Yibum, nor Chalitza, but Rachel passed away. Now that Rachel passed away, there's no more Zika. Then Yichnois says Ishtoi, then Levi can do Nesuyin with Leah. Or what happens if Meis Yavam, if Shimon dies, meaning that the only person who now has Zika with Rachel is Levi. So the Mishnah is going to point out that Levi cannot be neither with Rachel nor with Leah. Why? He can't be with Rachel because Rachel is Achos Ishtoi and Avram Midorais. Levi cannot consummate his marriage with Leah because Leah is Achos Zikukasai, because Levi is the only living brother who has to do Yibum or Chalitza with Rachel, and even if Levi will do Chalitza with Rachel, so we learned in the previous Mishnah, and in this Mishnah in the beginning, that Midrabanan, Levi cannot marry Achos Chalutzasai. So therefore both Yoitzias Ishtoi beget, Levi has to give a get to Leah, and the Eishes Achiv, and he has to sever his connection with Rachel through Chalitza. So as we mentioned when we learned the Mishnah, the words V'chein, when the Mishnah was contrasting a erva mido'eraisa versus an isur of marrying the relative of one's chalutza midrabanan, the Mishnah said the words v'chein. So my v'chein, because actually in the first case, but by hamagarash ishtoi, then it's completely pater. No chalitza is needed either. So Ema the Gemara corrects, say Avol Hamegarish and Amadesh Lakish Kan Shana Rebbe. It was from this Mishnah that Rebbe taught that Achois Gerusha is Asur Midivrei Torah. It's Achois Ishtoi. Whether the man is married or not to his wife, one cannot marry his wife's sister, with the only exception of when after one's wife dies. However, Achois Chalutzas Midivrei Soifrim, which is Enachanami Yibum, is not allowed to be done, but Choylet says. The next case in the Mishnah was Shemeres Yavam Shekidesh, and this was the din of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, that Yesh Zika, and therefore he has to wait, Levi has to wait to marry Leah till Shimon will either do Yibum or Chalitza with Rachel. So Amar Abba Shmuel says Shmuel Halacha Kedivrei Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and that was the inference that we learned many dafin before, that Halacha Mechlal the Pligi, and that was the other opinions that held the Ein Zika, but our Tana, and that's the halacha that the Ein Zika. Oh, now the Gemara comes along, and the Gemara asks what would happen in a case that the Mishnah did not mention. Iboilahu asked the Gemara, Meisa Ishtoi Mahu Biyavimtoi. What were to happen? Again, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven is married to Rachel. Reuven dies. There are two brothers left. Went along Levi, as the Mishnah pointed out, and Levi gave Kedushin to Leah. And the reason why Levi cannot consummate his marriage with Leah is because Leah is Achoy Zikukasei. What were to happen now if Meisa Ishtoi, if Leah died? Now that Leah died, the question is, can Levi now do Yibum with Rachel? Mahu biyavimtoi. When Levi was engaged to Leah, Levi was usher to do Yibum, and therefore exempt from doing Chalitza with Rachel, because Rachel then was Achai Sishtay. But now that his wife died, do we say that the original Heter, the original Zika that Rachel had with Shimon and with Levi goes back also to Levi, and Levi should now be allowed to marry Rachel and Yibum? Don't forget that the erva mido'eraisa of not marrying Achais Ishtoi doesn't stand after one's wife dies. So perhaps here one will be permitted as well. So the Gemara brings a machlekes of Amirayim, that Rav and Abchanina both say the Amri Tarvayu Meisa Ishtoi, they were lenient, mutter biyavimtoi. Levi now can marry with Yibum, he can do Yibum with Rachel. However, Shmuel and Avasi, the Amri Tarvayu Meisa Ishtoi, also biyavimtoi. They held that since there was a time after Reuven dies, and there was a zika between Rachel and Shimon or Levi, or Shimon and Levi, now that Levi gave Kedushin to Leah, and therefore Rachel, the Yevama, becomes an erva mido'eraisa, once she becomes aser, she always remains aser. Amar Rav, my Talmud Rav, Why was Rav and Abchanina lenient? Says the Gemara, explains Rava, Mishum Dahavi Yevamos Shuhutra. Because this Yevama Rachel initially was mutter to go to Yibum to Levi. However, Venesra, now she became Asir while she was waiting for Yibum, while she fell for Yibum, she became Asir because Levi married Leah. And even though now v'chazra v'hutra, but now that she became permissible again, is tachzar lehetera harishan, she goes back to her original heter, and she is allowed to do Yibum with Levi. Comes along Masay Rav Hamnuna, and Hamnuna quoted the Braisa. The Braisa is a continuation of a din that we learned before in the Mishnah, Daf Chavtes. And this Braisa seems to imply that once a woman became Asr, she will never go back to her Teira Hadishan, and it's going to be a kasha from a Tana against Rav. What is the case of the Braisa? And as I mentioned, this is a continuation of the case that we learned in the Mishnah and Daf Chavtes, that there were Gimalachim, that were Nesuyim, two of them were married to two sisters. So you have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven married Rachel, Shimon married Leah. And you have the third brother, Ve'echad Mufna, Levi is single. Step number one was Meis Echad Nibala Achoyes. One of the husbands of the sisters, Reuven, dies. So let's think this out. Now that Reuven dies, his widow, Rachel, will not fall to Yibum to Shimon, because Shimon is married to Leah, Achoyes Ishtay. So now Rachel is falling to Yibum or Chalitza only to Levi. And va'asabam mufna maimer, and Levi gave maimer the pre-Yibum act of kedushin with Rachel. And why is this needed? Because that was the Mishnah where we learned the machlekes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. According to Beis Shammai, maimer is a lot more of a Torah kedushin than according to Beis Hillel. However, the Mishnah is passing like Beis Hillel, and therefore the Mishnah says that even if Levi did maimer to Rachel, that means he's connected to Rachel but not fully married to her. And now Shimon dies. And think about it. Now that we have over here Leah and Rachel both connected through Zika to Levi, and even though Levi did Maimer is not marriage, Midoiraisam, so now Levi is usher to marry both Rachel and Leah. Each one is a Chayziku Kasam. However, then Shimon's wife Leah died. In other words, Rachel was initially mutter to Levi. He actually did Maimer. After Shimon dies, now each one of the widows, both Rachel and Leah, are usher to Levi. Each one is a sister to Levi's Zakuka. But now Leah died. And now that Leah died, Rachel is the only sister living. So she was mutter, she became asir, and now she's mutter. So says the Mishnah, Oisa Yevama, says the Braisa. Choylet says that Rachel needs to undergo chalitza. By the way, also a get because of the maimer, but she needs chalitza, but she cannot do yibum. So Zarmama Shatan against Rav, V'amai Teheviki, V'amushuhutra V'nesra V'chazra V'hutra, and according to Rav, Tachzer Lehetera Harishain, and you see that it's not so. Akasha against Rav. So when Rav Hamnuna asked this question, Ishtik, Rav didn't have an answer. We had this many times, and just to talk it out, Chassidus brings it many times, that when Rav, especially Rav, was quiet, it doesn't mean that he was refuted, it just means that he didn't have the answer. But he's still standing with his opinion. So Rav Hamnuna walks out. So the Basar Denafik, after Rav Hamnuna walked out and Rav was unable to answer him, so Amar Rav said, and you have two versions how to read this next line of the Gemara, that Amai lo yomrit lei, why didn't I respond to him? Or other people asked Rav, why didn't you respond to Rav Hamnuna? That how can you ask a question from a Braisa? Perhaps that Braisa is only the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. That Braisa only goes according to the Tana of Rabbi Elazar, and the Chachamim who argue with Rabbi Elazar, as we'll explain in a moment, also argue with the Braisa, and Rav will paskin like Kerabim, like the Rabbanan. The Amar, what is the opinion of Rabbi Elazar? Rabbi Elazar's opinion was in a different case, in a simpler case, but not fully similar. Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim are addressing a simple case of Yibum. Reuven is married to Rachel. Before Reuven dies childless, Reuven divorces Rachel, and then Reuven is not a kohen, Reuven remarries Rachel. And then Reuven dies without children. Rabbi Elazar holds that in this case, Shimon will not be allowed to do Yibum with Rachel. Why? When Rachel married Reuven initially, like in any married couple, even though while Reuven is married to Rachel, no man can be with Rachel, she's an Eish Ish. On top of that, Shimon cannot be with Rachel because she is Eishes Ach. But there's always the possibility that if Reuven will die without children, then Shimon will have a mitzvah to marry Yibum to be Miyabim Rachel. In other words, during the initial marriage, Shimon is always, so to say, mutter to Rachel under the circumstance of a Yibum. However, now that Reuven divorces Rachel, now that they're divorced, even if Reuven were to die, since they were divorced, there will not be the mitzvah of Yibum. And on the other hand, Rachel will always be Eishes Ach. Rachel is Reuven's sister, always Asr as an erva to Shimon. So when Reuven divorced Rachel, then she's always Asr on Shimon. So Rabbi Elazar holds, even if Reuven remarries her, and then he dies without children, since there was a time when Rachel was not allowed to be ever with Shimon, then Shimon cannot do the mitzvah of Yibum with Rachel. However, she'll have to do Chalitza. The Kivan Sha'amda Olav Shas Shah Achas Be'isur, Nesra Olav Ilamishi will always be Asr. Let me just correct myself. Even Chalitza will not be needed, because she becomes Asr as the erva of Eishes Ach. So what do we see from Rabbi Elazar? That even though that when Reuven was initially married to Rachel, then when Reuven dies, you have the mitzvah of Yibum. Since there was a Shah Achas, when Reuven divorced Rachel, that Shimon was not allowed to marry Rachel even in Yibum, because there's no Yibum if they're divorced, so she's Nesra Elamis. So that is the author of the previous Braisa that goes like Shmuel. However, Rav will paskin like the Chachamim. So the question was, why didn't Rav answer the Braisas like Rabbi Elazar? So Hadar Amar, so either Rav corrected himself, or Rav explained to those who asked him, that was not the correct answer. Because there is a difference. Because one could say, Eimer the Amar Rabbi Elazar. When did Rabbi Elazar say that Hutra v'Nesra v'Chazra v'Hutra, she remains Asur? That's only Heichel D'Loi Chazia b'Shas Nefila. We keep on learning that the pivotal time, the most important time when Yibum begins is B'Shas Misas Reuven, when the husband dies. Perhaps, when does Rabbi Elazar say that since she was once Asr, she was always Asr? Because that moment where Shimon was always Asr with Rachel happened before the mitzvah of Yibum came up. No, it's Reuven married Rachel, Reuven divorced Rachel, then Reuven remarried his original wife Rachel. So now that Reuven dies, the Shas Isur already was in the world. There Rabbi Elazar says, Kivan Shenasra, she's always Asr. Aval Heiche, but in our case, when there was Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, in the case of the Boya of the Gemara, in the case of the Braisa that we quoted, the Chazia B'Shas Nefila, that initially, when Reuven died, Levi was allowed to marry Rachel. So that's a better case. Perhaps everyone will agree over there that Kivan Shenasra, that while she was already in Yibum, that Yibum was broken. In other words, the Zika between Levi and Rachel was broken because Shimon now died, and there's a Chayziku Kasa Yisur. So maybe everyone will hold that she's Asr, even the Chachamim. So therefore the Kasha is against Rav, and Rav was unable to answer that that's only Rabbi Elazar. Mi Yamar. Even the Chachamim would agree that she's Asr. So that's why Rav didn't respond to Rav Amnuna. However, the Gemara goes back and the Gemara says, Hadar Amar, but then Rav says, no, that could have been a good answer. And that's taka the right answer. And I should have told it to Rav Amnuna. Or it should have been told to Rav Amnuna. That the Shita of Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Elazar, say in the case that the Shas Isur came before she fell to Yibum. Both also in the case where the Shas Isur happened after she fell to Yibum, that in both cases Rabbi Elazar holds, since she was Asr once, she remains Asr. The Chachamim disagree with that, and that is taka, the opinion of Rav. V'hatanyan, like we learned, and now we're going to find a brayser where Rabbi Elazar, not the Chachamim, say his opinion. Kivan Shenesra, she remains Asr, even if there was a Shas Heter, after the Nefila, that it says in the Braisa, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Meisa Yevimtoi Mamash, in the case of our Mishnah, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, Reuven marries Rachel, Reuven dies. And you have Shimon and Levi. Levi goes ahead, and Levi does Kedushin with Leah. If Meisa Yevimtoi, if now Rachel dies, Mutar Be'ishtoi, Levi can marry Leah. And reverse, if Meisa Ishtoi, if Leah dies, so the din is Oisa Yevama Chayletzes V'lo Misyabemes. That Rabbi Elazar says that Levi cannot do Yibum with Rachel. Rabbi Elazar, which means the Chachamim will disagree. The Chachamim will hold that Levi is allowed to do Yibum with Rachel, because since when Reuven died, Rachel and Levi were allowed to be together. And even though afterwards, even though she was waiting for Yibum, Levi got engaged to Leah, Venesra to Rachel. But now that Leah died, so the original heter returns, according to the Chachamim. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, if this is a Braisa, which says the din of Rabbi Elazar, which is a din of Shmuel, Rav will hold to the Chachamim, so does that mean, Leima, that Shmuel and Avasi, that they were Machmer, they can only go according to Rabbi Elazar, which won't be ideal? So the Gemara says, "Afilu teimer kerabanan." Shmuel will tell you that he can even hold like the Rabbanan. At kan loikum miflik kerabanan lo the Rabbi Elazar ela mishum deminafila ve'elach lo mitatzer olayu. That he would answer that when the Rabbanan and Rabbi Elazar argue only in the case that we spoke about, where Reuven divorced Rachel, then he remarried Rachel, and then he died. Which means that when Rachel falls to Yibum, there was already a moment when she was Asar on Shimon. And only over there, like we explained before, do we have a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar and the Chachamim are lenient, and they hold that Shimon can do Yibum. Aval hache di itasar, but over here, when she was waiting for Yibum, when Rachel was waiting for Yibum to Levi, something happened that made Rachel Asar on Levi, which was Levi got engaged to Leah. Afilo the Rabbanan Amoidi, that she will remain Asr, and therefore Shmuel will hold Sai like the Rabbanan and Sai like Rabbi Elazar. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol b'dvarim. Okay, second Mishnah says the Mishnah Hayavama. Continuing learning the dinim, that there has to be a 3-month delay between one marriage and another marriage. And the Mishnah begins teaching us this din when it comes to the mitzvah of Yibum. And then the Mishnah will apply this din to all marriages. Hayavama lo yitachaloitz v'lo yitzasyabim. Ad sheyesh lo shloisha chadashim. Reuven is married to Rachel, Reuven dies. The mitzvah of Yibum is only if Reuven died without children. There's always the worry, maybe Rachel, the widow, maybe she's pregnant with Reuven's child, and if that were to be the case, then she remains an Eishes Ach, and she's an Erva on Shimon. Not only is there no mitzvah of Yibum, but there is an Isur Erva, Kares, for Shimon to be with Rachel. So therefore, Shimon has to wait 3 months, not Yibum, nor Chalitza should be done. And we learned that before, Rabbi Yechanan and Ashlakish. If he did chalitza, and it turns out that she was pregnant, chalitza is not even an act of a sin. Does chalitza have to be repeated or not? In any event, the Mishnah says that lechatchila chalitza nor yibum obviously should not be done in the first 3 months. V'chein, continues the Mishnah, this is not only the havchana of 3 months needed by yibum, but by every time a woman gets married. Kol shar hanoshim. That if Rachel was married to Reuven, and Reuven divorces Rachel, Shimon cannot marry her. Shimon is a brother. But another man, Chaim, wants to marry Rachel. That not only can Chaim not do Nisuyin with her, but according to the Chachamim, he should not even get engaged. Even Erusin, even Kedushin should not be done. That lo yisarsu, v'lo yunasu, that any other man should not get engaged, certainly not do marriage, achiyu lahem shloisha chadashim, until 3 months passed from when Rachel was separated either through a get or through passing of the death of her original husband. And echad b'sulois, even if Rachel was never with a man before. which means that it was just an engagement with the first husband. Ve'echad bu'ulais, or if she was married, if she had a relation with another man. Echad gerushais, regardless if her separation from her first husband was through a get. Ve'echad almonais, or if it was because her first husband died and she became a widow. Echad nesuyais, ve'echad arusais, whether she was engaged or she was fully married. The Gemara is going to point out that psulais and bu'ulais is the same of nesuyais and arusais. Because for a wife to still be a psula, that means that she was only a wife through engagement, there was no marriage yet. That's the Tanakama. Now, really, the logic of the din, as we'll see in the Gemara, we want to know who the father is. That logic is only shaykh by marriage. If Rachel was only engaged to Reuven and they were never physically together, that means she's not pregnant. So theoretically, there should not be the need of hafchana of the 3 months. However, the Chachamim hold loy plug, across the board. A woman comes out of a marriage, whether it was a kedushin or a nesuyin, whether she comes out of it through a get or through death of her husband, she always needs to wait 3 months. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, the Tana Rabbi Yehuda, argues with the Chachamim, and he says that this din of hafchana is only needed to know who the father is, and if a woman was not with her husband, then there's no need to wait. So therefore, if she was fully married to the first husband, hanusuyos, she can get engaged right away. Yis arsu, she cannot do nesuyin. She has to wait 3 months from the death or get of the first husband to consummate her second marriage. But to get engaged, she's allowed to do. Or in reverse, if her connection to her first husband was only through engagement for ha'arusais, I mean she was never physically together with her first husband, then when it comes to her second marriage, she can actually get married within the first 3 months. Yinasu. With one exception, Chutz min ha'arusai shebi Yehuda, that in the region of Eretz Yisrael, of Yehuda, over there, when men and women got engaged, the Chachamim there wanted for the Chassan and Kala to be alone, secluded, to have yichud together. They wanted them to be more familiar with each other. So like this, when they get married, it should be more comfortable to them to be intimate together. Being that they allowed Chassan and Kalas to be together, there was always the possibility that they were intimate together, which is wrong, but such a possibility existed. So therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says that in Yehuda were a Chassan and a Kala, even though they were only engaged, used to spend time together alone, and there was a possibility that the Kala would get engaged. There, if the Chassan dies or gives her a get, there she needs 3 months to get married, because she could have been together. However, in all other regions, like the Rabbi Yehuda says, if there was only Eirusin, then you don't need to wait 3 months for Nasuyin. And in reverse, if she was fully married to the first husband, then engaged, she can get engaged right away to the second husband. Rabbi Yossi holds, just like Rabbi Yehuda, that the din of Hafchana is only from marriage to marriage. However, it's not from engagement to marriage, nor it is from marriage to engagement, with another exception. That kol hanoshim yisarsu chutz min ha'almana. If a woman becomes a widow from marriage, there she's not allowed to get engaged right away, turning the page to Daf Mem Aleph Amud Beis, mipnei ha'ibol, because of dinei avelus. A wife has to mourn for her husband 30 days. So in those 30 days, she's not allowed to get engaged to a new husband, but not because of the din of Avchana, and 3 months are not needed, but because of dinim of avelus. Says the Gemara. The Mishnah started off telling you that in the case of Yibum, when Reuven is married to Rachel and Reuven dies childless, Shimon should not do Yibum nor Chalitza until 3 months passes. So the Gemara asks, we understand why Shimon should not do Yibum with Rachel, because Shema Yavlad ben Kayom, because Rachel might be pregnant and she might give birth to a viable child. And if Shimon, would have done Yibum, would have had an act of intimacy with Rachel, then he violated a Isur Doraisa of Eishes Ach, the Kopoga be Isur Eishes Ach, which is a Doraisa. Avol loisach haloitz, but doing Chalitza not, amai, why not? L'cha'ira lema, to have it to yufta the Rabbi Yechanan, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that holds that Chalitza with a woman, that's a mu'beres. If it turns out later that she aborted or she gave birth to a still child, God forbid. In other words, that she needed chalitza. The chalitza is a good chalitza. So why are you aciding? Why are you prohibiting chalitza? Because Rabbi Yochanan says chalitza is moberesh ma chalitza. Now, we went through the sugya before, and we actually said that these are one of the three cases where we paskin like Reb Shlakish over Rabbi Yochanan. And Reb Shlakish says that chalitza is meoberes loshma chalitza. In other words, you cannot do chalitza with a pregnant woman, and if later it turns out that she needed chalitza, that chalitza was not valid. But is this Mishnah not a question against Rabbi Yochanan? The Gemara says we already refuted Rabbi Yochanan from another Braisa. So what if this Mishnah contradicts Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan was already contradicted from another Tana. So the Gemara says, could we say that this Mishnah would also be a refutation against Rabbi Yochanan? And that's important, because when you refute a Amoira from a Tana, if later someone can resolve that refutation, if someone can answer that question, so then the opinion of the Amoira is reinstated. So if you have a double refutation, it becomes harder for them to get reinstated. So the Gemara says, Loi, that you cannot refute, you could not slug up Rabbi Yochanan from our Mishnah, Hachi Hainatama. The reason why, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, that holds that Chalitzas Me'oberes Shema Chalitza, nevertheless the Mishnah says you have to wait 3 months, is because Shema Yehei Vlad Ben Kayamam. Because let's say that it's going to turn out that Rachel was pregnant and she'll give birth to a viable child, which means she was never a Yevamos, which means the Chalitza was never a needed chalitza, she's not a chalutza. And if later a kohen would want to marry her, a kohen would be allowed to marry her, because she's no longer a woman that underwent chalitza. And midrabanan, a kohen cannot marry a chalutza. So later announcements will have to be made to say that even though people witness a chalitza, it was not needed and she's muteres to a kohen. So the Gemara says, who cares if such an announcement is needed? V'nitzracha, let it be needed, and make such an announcement. So the Gemara answers, no, dilma ika dahava b'chalitza. There might be a man that witnessed the chalitza, a kohen, and v'lei'hava b'hachraza, and he will not know, he will not hear the announcement that will say that the chalitza was not needed, and u'mifsaluha min hakohuna, and she'll remain aser. Or as we learned before, another way of wording this, or that someone who heard the announcement will marry her, and a observer won't know that she's not a chalutza, and the observer will think that a kohen can marry a chalutz. Frekti Gemara Tinach Almana, this works by a almana, that according to Rabbi Yochanan, the 3 months, even for chalitza, is needed, not to mistake her with a chalutza. What about a woman who comes with a history? A woman, Reuven and Rachel. Before Reuven married Rachel, Rachel was married to Chaim, and Rachel got divorced from Chaim. So she is already a gerusha, which means that she's not allowed to marry a kohen mid'oraisa. So in the case of a gerusha, why would a gerusha need to wait 3 months for chalitza? This answer is not applicable. She's anyways asur l'kohen. Answers the Gemara, I'll tell you why. Because even a woman who's already a gerusha, we'll learn later soon that a woman who is an almana can live off the estate of her deceased husband if she can claim that she's not getting remarried out of respect to her first husband. She loves her first husband, she wants his memory to last, she feels that if she'll marry another man, it's going to diminish the memory of her first husband. In such a case, she lives off the estate of her first husband. What about if a woman falls to Yibum? There is a mitzvah to get married. So at least during the first 3 months, she can claim that she wants to get married because of her first husband, but she's not allowed to get married because the Chachamim said that you have to wait 3 months. So she can live off the estate of Reuven until 3 months passes. However, the moment she gets chalitza, and obviously, or Yibum, then Yibum, she gets supported by her new husband. And even if she gets chalitza, the fact she gets chalitza, she's free to marry anyone else. She no longer can live off the estate. So explains the Gemara the reason why you have to wait 3 months. It's really not, according to Rabbi Yochanan, a isur, a prohibition for her to get chalitza, but it's like an eitzah teva. Don't get chalitza within the first 3 months, because if you will get chalitza, mishum de mafsid la mezaynis, you will no longer be able to take your monthly living expenses off Reuven's estate. Fragt the Gemara, Tinach Nesuya, this works if Rachel was married to Reuven, which in such a case, when Reuven dies, the almana gets to live off his estate, like in this case, until 3 months go by. But what about Arusa? What happens if Rachel was only engaged to Reuven? And a woman who is engaged to her husband and then becomes a widow never gets to live off the estate of her deceased chassan. And she's also a gerusha from a previous marriage. So that means that she's anyways asura l'kayin, is my ikr l'meimer. Why, according to Rabbi Yochanan, in such a case would you need to wait 3 months? So for this, the Gemara answers, Ela mishum de Rabbi Yosi. It has nothing to do with Rabbi Yochanan nor Rash Lakish. It has to do with the din of Rabbi Yosi. The time we learned that Maisa Shabam ba'adam echad, that there was a man Shabal lefnei Rabbi Yosi, that he came in front of Rabbi Yosi, Amar lei, and he asked Rabbi Yosi, Mahu lachloitz b'seich gimel. Can chalitza happen within the first 3 months of the passing of the husband? Amar lei loy tachaloitz. Fragt Gemara v'tachaloitz umabakach. Why not? They asked Rabbi Yosi, why not? So Kara Olav Mikrazem. So he read the following pasuk. It says that im lo yachvaitz, that chalitza is done when the living brother Shimon does not want to do yibum, which means that chalitza should be done in a case where he could have done it, but he didn't do it. Ha'im chafetz yabim. Meaning, kol ha'oila yibum, whenever yibum is an option, then oila chalitza, then chalitza is something that could be done. But when yibum is not an option, then chalitza cannot be done. Now this is a very important statement that needs some clarification. Because throughout the Masechta Yevamos, together we have learned many times, especially when there is an isud midrabanan to do yibum, that means yibum is a non-option midrabanan, the Chachamim nevertheless said choletzes. In other words, there are times, even according to Rabbi Yosi, that chalitza will be done when yibum cannot be done. However, that case is very different than this application of Rabbi Yosi. Whenever yibum is a non-option mido'iraisa, erva, then chalitza is taka not needed. That's the first mishnah of Masechta Yevamos. Whenever yibum is an option mido'iraisa, even when the Chachamim prohibited the union between the living brother and the widow, being that mido'iraisa there's a chiyuv of yibum, the Chachamim said at least do chalitza. When does Rabbi Yosi say his din that whenever yibum is a non-option, chalitza should not be done? That is when yibum is a temporary non-option. That is in a case like over here where yibum will be an option after 3 months. It is in such a case that Rabbi Yosi says his din, that being that the Torah words im lo yachboitz, if you don't want to do yibum, do chalitza. In other words, we are linking chalitza with yibum. There we say, don't do chalitza now, do chalitza at a later time where yibum is possible. Applied in such a case. Now the Gemara is going to ask on the din of Rabbi Yosi, Masav Rab Chinan, what happens has sfeikas? It says in a Braisa that if there is a sfeika, we'll see soon what that means, a woman that by doubt needs to get yibum only by doubt, and we'll see again that this is a doubt that with time could be clarified, and whenever with time yibum could be an option, the Chachamim, according to Rabbi Yosi, say, wait, don't do chalitza until such a time comes about, where you're choosing between both the option of yibum and chalitza. So it says in a Braisa that hasfeikos choltzos v'lemisyabmos, that a woman who is only a doubtful yevama should do chalitza and not yibum. And now we have to clarify what is the case of the Braisa Maisveikos. If we're speaking about a Safik Kedushin, like we learned before, let's say there was a man and a woman, and they were standing in Rishus Harabim, and they were 8 amas apart of each other. And the man threw Kedushin to his Kala to be, and it landed exactly in the middle. And we don't know if the Kedushin money landed closer to his 4 cubits or inside her 4 amas. And over there, this husband now who gave her the Safik Kedushin dies. If that would have been the case, can be, because there, why not? Why would Shimon not be allowed to do Yibum? Amai loy misyabmois, mimanavshach. Tisyabim ve'em bekach klum. If Reuven's kedushin fell closer to Rachel, that means that she's the kala of Reuven. So now that Reuven died, she's a Yevama, and Shimon has the mitzvah to do yibum. If the money of kedushin did not fall closer to Rachel, that means that they're not engaged. So she's not his brother's wife. She's a single woman. If she's a single woman, why should Shimon not be allowed to marry Rachel? So there would not be an isur for him to do yibum. Elolav, we're speaking about a case, shesafik, shekidish, achas, mishtei achois, where a man doesn't know which one of the two sisters he gave engagement in. For example, Reuven sent the shliach to be mekadesh, and the shliach was mekadesh either Rachel or Leah. And normally these doubts will become clarified when the shliach comes back, or when the witnesses who were there, because you need to have witnesses by Kedushin, will say that, the Kedushin was accepted by Rachel or by Leah. So until that becomes clarified, now Reuven dies, so you have two sisters, one of them is a Yevama, and the other is Achais Ishtay, right, the sister of the Yevama, or Achayziku Kasai, ve'eni de'ezim kiddush. So there we say, because of the isur of Achayziku Kasai, Cholzois and not Misyabmois. Now here also, this is a doubt that could become clarified by asking the Eidi Kedushin or the Shliach in the near future. So why didn't Rabbi Yossi hold Chalitza should not be done either? If Chalitza and Yibum have to happen when both of them are options, answers the Gemara, Hachi Hashta. You cannot compare one case to the other. Over there, Hassam, where we don't know who the original brother was engaged to, was married to, that's a doubt in the Metzias. It's not a doubt in a din. And therefore, for example, the Gemara says, Im Yavei Eliyahu, if Eliyahu Navi will come, and he will clarify the doubt, and V'yomer, and he will say, Daha Kiddush, that the Kiddushin went to, let's say, to Rachel. So then, when we will find out, Bas Chalitza v'Yibum, we will find out she will both be allowed to have Yibum or Chalitza. In other words, it's a doubt only based on our lack of knowledge of information. Over there, even Rabbi Yossi holds that Chalitza can be done immediately, because Yibum is an option. The reason why Yibum is not happening now is because we don't know who the wife was. But it's an option if we will find out. And it's an option when we will find out. But Hachi over here, in our case, when it comes to the din of you can't do Yibum or Chalitza b'toich Gimel, that's not a doubt that is a Metzias doubt. That's a din. The Chachamim says that between one marriage and the next Yibum, and v'chein kol hanasuyos, you have to wait 3 months. Eliyahu Hanavi's coming and telling you if she is or not pregnant can never change the din. Im Yavei Eliyahu v'yomer dahal lo yabra. Eliyahu Navi is going to come and is going to say Rachel was married to Reuven and Reuven died. And Eliyahu Navi is going to say Rachel for sure is not pregnant. Still, mi mashgiach bei, will we listen to him? In other words, v'yabminan and allow Shimon to do Yibum within the first 3 months? No. And the proof is that the din of the Chachamim is a din whether we know for sure or not. Haktana. What happens if Rachel was a Ktana that cannot become pregnant? The last bas aiburehi. Nevertheless, the Chachamim, who says that you need to wait a hafchan of 3 months, was a loy plug, was across the board. And therefore, being that this is not something that could be clarified by Eliyahu Navi, Rabbi Yossi says, Im lo yachpoitz, wait until 3 months to do Chalitza. In other words, whenever you can wait to do Yibum, wait to do Chalitza as well. Tana Rabbanan continues the Gemara. And now we're going to learn about the din, about a Yevama being allowed to live off the estate of her deceased husband for the first 3 months. Which is why we gave this Eitzah for her not to have Chalitza. According to one of the answers we had before in the Gemara, during the first 3 months, Nizainis Mishal Baal, she can live of the estate of her husband. In other words, whenever a widow can claim that her not moving on in life is because of her first husband, she gets to live off his estate. And here she has this claim because it is because of her first husband that she's not allowed to do Yibum with Shimon, because maybe she's pregnant from her first husband. Mikan ve'elach, after 3 months goes by, and now she's allowed to do Yibum. Not only is she allowed to do Yibum, but if she would have had children, then she can wait a year, she can wait 10 years, and she can constantly claim she's not moving on in honor of her first husband. But when a woman died, when her husband was childless, Hashem gave her an obligation to move on, to honor her husband and to do Yibum. So she's actually mechuyev to do Yibum. So after 3 months goes by, she dafka cannot be nezoinis Mishal, her first husband. She's not honoring him by not getting remarried. She will honor him by getting Yibum with Shimon. And not only that, if none of the brothers did Yibum yet, nor Chalitza, she can't live off their estate either. She cannot demand to be supported by Shimon, even if Yesh Zika, he didn't do Yibum yet. However, if Amad Bedin, but what happens if she wants to do Yibum with Shimon, and Shimon is not doing anything with her, not he's freeing her to marry, not Chalitza, nor Yibum, she can take him to a Din Torah. And if in a Din Torah, the Din will tell Shimon, you have to do Yibum, the moment they paskin that he has to do that, he's mechoif to support her. That Ubarach, if then Shimon runs away, Nezoinis Mishal Yavim, the Din will go into the estate of Shimon, and they will take the money that she, the widow, needs for her to live. What happens if Nafla Lifnei Yavam Katan, Mai? In other words, if Shimon is a minor, which means he cannot yet do Yibum with her, so then, miyavam, that she will for sure not live of the estate of the minor, for sure Leslie, because he cannot do Yibum with her. So he's not mechoif to support her. The question is, mi ba'al, mai, can she now claim that I would do Yibum, but the brother is a minor, I need to wait. And I'm not marrying any other man, I'm not allowed to because I'm bound to my husband's brother, so she can somehow blame it on her husband for not moving on. Can she in such a case live off the estate of her deceased husband until Shimon becomes an adult? So here the Gemara says, Pligaba Rav Acha v'Ravina, Chad Amar Islay, v'Chad Amar Leslay, you have a machlekes, and v'Hilchas Leslay, and the din is that she will not live off the estate of neither of them. She's claiming it, so to say, it's because of my husband. So the Gemara says, no, it's not because of her husband. Mishamaya kenosua, that we can say it's her bad mazel. From the heavens, they penalized this widow that she should not have a husband, nor that she can marry yet the brother because he's a minor. And the hashgacha prata, so to say, is that she should not have parnasa, and she does not get to live off anyone's estate until she'll have yibum from the brother who's young after he becomes an adult. We'll stop over here, and the Mitzvah Hashem to be continued.